The advice you give to others is usually the advice that you should take for yourself. And that might be a hard pill to swallow because you're like, well, I've already done that work. But maybe you haven't done it completely. Maybe you've only done a percentage amount of that work and you still have room to grow and be better in that area. So whenever I feel like I have to give advice to, my kids or another person, there's a time where I'll look at it and be like, can I use that advice for me? Do I need to take that advice myself? And sometimes you're like, you know what, no, that was a time for me to create boundaries with somebody instead of take advice for myself. And so the more you do this, it's important for you to reflect on, am I the problem? Are they the problem, or are we both a problem? And so there was a time where I was in very toxic relationships, and it was always about me. I was always the issue. I was always a problem, and these people could not take a look at themselves. And so when someone's not willing to look at how they're part of the problem and how they could be better, and they're not perfect yet either. It's not about being perfect, but it's like, do I do this too? And you got to bring in the human factor. The human factor is we are not perfect, and it's easier to see fault in other people instead of ourselves. And so when you start to look outside of ourselves and we look at like it's easy to notice in someone else, that's a way to reflect back and say, okay, I need to do that still too. I still need to work on that more. I need to just still do more of that. And then there's times where when I was in workplaces and in relationships that were really abusive, they could not see how they didn't have the experience to see what I was telling them about. Like, this is times where I was doing everything that I could in that situation to try to tolerate the situation, allowing room for growth, hoping that they would see either by my example or just like give them some time for them to reflect, where they could be like, you know what, no, I am doing that. I do need to do that better. And I need to apologize and find a way to do something different. So there's times where it started out where I'm always a problem. It actually kind of ended up where I was always a problem. But instead of just sitting in resentment about these repetitive patterns of like over giving and under receiving, I had to take a step back and look at, how was I the problem? Because if I'm still putting up with disrespect from people and I'm still going into the same rooms with the same personality types and thinking something different is going to happen, that's still on me now, right? So you got to see like where people aren't willing to budge, and you keep aligning with people that aren't going to budge, aren't going to reflect, and that means I have to look at, why am I attracted to situations and people that are one way, my way, the highway? That was part of my upbringing. That's who I was raised around. And I was also raised with another parent who was very submissive and would just tolerate that, because I think for them it was more about like financial security. And I had to recognize some of this was for what I thought was financial security. And then I realized there is no financial security in this. The only financial security is if I stay inside my box and I receive the abuse that they're handing out. And so I had to then, because they weren't going to change, I had to change. And so I had to look at, why am I attracted to these situations? Why am I going into these dynamics? And it felt like I was scared of doing things by myself, whether it be in a relationship or at a job place. And I had to learn, okay, so like maybe I have to create my own job. Maybe I have to work for myself. And that felt scary. But then when you come out of that backstabbing and betrayal and that shock and loss from the situation, because you did everything you could and it still wasn't working and you had to leave, you recognize like, wow, like if those people are bosses and they can't even see what's right in front of their face, and you're learning to recognize and you're able to recognize both sides of the coin, that's the blind spot that they were unwilling to look at. So now that's where you have a leg up, where you have more experience, because not only for yourself, if you're able to hold yourself accountable, that's what these people couldn't do or wouldn't do. And so they're going to be surrounded by people like that as well. And so in general, that's just not a savory place to be. And so the sooner you can start recognizing where I am part of this dynamic and I have choice and I can choose, that's where you level up. That's where you create change. And it's not easy. It's growing pains. Growing pains are extremely uncomfortable. They're very slow, which makes when you're in a fast survival mode energy, trying to bring in some of that childlike mentality is like a oil and water, and it's something you're meant to grow into and get used to instead of like just jump into. And while some of the experiences are jumping into them, The expectation is to give yourself compassion, grace, time, and space to grow and make a mess and learn those things that are actually going to be really easy for you. But because nobody gave you any sort of like support, or you know, nobody said like, I think you can do that, you're going to have to do that for yourself. But you can do it because you're seeing it in other people. And so that means you have created change within yourself and other situations where you've done that. Remember when you could see things that other people couldn't see? This is just going to be another example. You've already got the milestones to be able to do this. You know, you've already got the leadership skills. You've already been doing everything, your own responsibilities plus other people's work. So like now the idea is to bring back the amount of work that you're doing, work smarter, not harder, and recognize where you've been doing too much in the beginning anyway. So you've got room to grow because you're already doing too much, meaning other people's work. So when you go into hermit mode and you let everyone else take care of their responsibilities and you start taking care of yours, you allow more space. And that space is to learn what you need to know in order to grow further.